Okay, last questions and we just round up because we
Segunda pregunta. ¿Qué hacer con el miedo a descubrir la propia naturaleza?
So what to do with the fear to discover one's own true nature? Igual tú te puedes...
what to do with the fear to discover one's own true nature? It's a very good, very good question. Very valid question. Very valid question. Maybe you translate with me.
Una pregunta muy válida.
Yeah. Because it is true, we are afraid to find out who we truly are.
Porque ciertamente tenemos miedo a descubrir quiénes somos en realidad.
Because that somehow is associated with losing that which we think we are.
Porque eso va asociado a perder aquello que pensamos que somos.
Because that is associated perhaps in our thinking with the dismantling of the idea about ourselves, and that is very unsettling.
Porque eso lo relacionamos con una desintegración de quienes creemos que somos y eso nos perturba.
But at the same time, that imaginary reality that we have of ourselves
y al mismo tiempo esa realidad imaginaria que tenemos de nosotros mismos
doesn't have life of its own.
No tiene vida propia. Eso que creemos que somos no tiene vida propia.
It's also illumined by the light within, which is our consciousness, which is our awareness.
También lo ilumina la luz dentro de nosotros, que es nuestra conciencia, nuestra...
So really, even this fear is imaginary, because it belongs to that imaginary personality.
Así que incluso este miedo es imaginario, porque pertenece a esa personalidad imaginaria.
And when we realize that we're much greater than we have ever thought of ourselves,
cuando nos damos cuenta de que somos mucho más grandes de lo que hemos creído ser,
that fear itself, that it simply evaporates as a smoke when the sun is rising, as this kind of like a mist. It just kind of recedes.
Ese miedo se evapora. Did I forget something?
Yeah, it's okay. So that fear itself, that even the fear itself is not real.
Hasta incluso el miedo mismo no es real.
It doesn't have existence of its own.
No tiene existencia propia.
But I understand where you're coming from. I totally understand, because it somehow feels that if we lose the idea of who we are in that kind of, let's say, role that life gave us to play.
Yo entiendo de dónde viene tu pregunta, porque efectivamente si perdemos ese rol que tenemos en esta vida,
it's as if we will forget the words that we're supposed to utter in that very role.
Incluso perdemos las palabras que teníamos que decir en ese mismo rol.
But it is like an actor who is on stage acting.
Es como un actor que está en el escenario actuando.
Is afraid that when he will get off the stage, he will no longer be his self.
Es como si ese mismo actor tuviera miedo de que cuando deje el escenario deja de ser el personaje que ha sido.
Do you see what I'm trying to say?
¿Me entiendes?
Entiendo, es un acto de confianza.
To understand is an act of trust.
as an act of complete irrevocable trust. It's like basically you cannot trust because it's your core. This is really you. That's what is really you. So you cannot even trust or not trust. It's as it is. It's greater than trust.
Va incluso más allá de la confianza porque es tu misma naturaleza. Es
Creas luego, no creas, es lo que hay.
no tienes que confiar en porque eres.
Confiar en que ese es.
To trust in that one is.
En que no hay vacío.
And that there is no.
Confiar en que no hay vacío.
To trust that there is no emptiness.
Well, depends how you see it. You know, there's some schools that they promulgate the view of shunyata, like in certain Buddhist views. You can translate right away then.
Bueno, depende de la perspectiva que uno coja. Hay escuelas que promueven la idea de shunyata,
Like a void.
el vacío.
But that's not emptiness, it's not nothing.
Pero no, eso no es un nada.
You know, if you prefer the more kind of Indian idea of fullness, purna, purnamada,
Si prefieres la idea más hindú de la plenitud, puna,
because they are the same essentially.
porque son esencialmente lo mismo.
And that what empowers this apparent individuality.
Y eso es lo que empodera esta individualidad aparente.
So you cannot become nothing, you can only become everything.
No puedes llegar a ser nada, solo puedes llegar a ser todo.
And the paradox is that you are already that everything.
La paradoja es que ya eres eso todo, ese todo.
It just need to be brought into conscious awareness. It just has to be brought into cognitive reality, where it is cognized throughout your entire being.
Sencillamente hay que hacerlo completamente consciente a nivel de todo el cuerpo, de todo tu ser.
But you cannot be anything else. You cannot be anyone else because you are already that.
Pero en realidad no puedes ser ninguna otra cosa porque ya eres eso.
So when we investigate that way, then how can there be any fear, being afraid of who you are? That would seem to be strange.
Cuando investigamos eso, ¿cómo se puede tener miedo de lo que tú eres en realidad?
I would be afraid not to know and live life in not knowing who I am. That should be the real fear.
Tendría miedo más bien de no saber quién soy, de vivir en esa ignorancia de no saber quién soy.
Bueno.
Okay.
Hasta desde el punto de vista científico se ha descubierto que los átomos son prácticamente vacíos.
From a scientific point of view, they've discovered that atoms are practically empty.
Cuando digo propia naturaleza es propias capacidades, propia expresión.
Yeah, but this
Físico es de conciencia. Cuando hablo yo entendía propia naturaleza no a la parte física, sino a descubrir el sentido de estar aquí.
When I referred to my own nature,
haber vivido en una fantasía y ya no está esta fantasía. Miedo a perder esta fantasía. El show de
when she was referring to her own nature, she wasn't referring so much to her body, she was referring to her capacities and her expression.
I understand, yeah. I understand where the question came from, and it's a legitimate question. Because that every seeker of truth faces that question, or faces that dilemma, that kind of transition of realignment. And could be at times scary, because there is also a transitional period known as, not knowing who you are, because you kind of caught in between on which leg you stand until you stand on both and you stand in oneness.
Él entiende de dónde viene tu pregunta, ¿no? Porque efectivamente existe ese momento como de transición, que no estás ni aquí ni allí, que no estás completamente alineada. Y es un periodo.
Have you also been in this phase?
Oh yes, of course. Yes.
Has estado también en esta fase. Sí,
Well,
How long does it last?
it could last. I mean, the most, let's say, the most dramatic or the most acute, it was for about 3 days I didn't know who I was, because the relationship to the body was completely alien. It was completely indifferent, because the experience was so powerful and so intense that, let's say, re-entering the body was very much, and I'm not talking about out-of-body experience, I'm not talking about all these phenomenal experiences, but when you experience yourself as light of pure consciousness, then obviously immediate question is that, and who is this then? Why am I locked into that psychophysiological reality? Why do I have to function from that? If I was speaking to trees, animals, oceans, mountains, planets, space, encompassing it all, being it all in one, and being beneath on a sub-molecular level, subatomic level. Of course there was this and who am I then, and it lasted for about roughly 3 days. Very, very unsettling place. But I don't think the question was coming from that, but since you're asking me, yes, there are degrees. And then that's what it's called, the integration. The integration is when you integrate that actually there's a purpose why you are in this body, And for instance, the platform of teaching that I stand myself is not negation. There is a lot of teachers out there and whole traditions where negate this body, that this body is irrelevant, unimportant, let it wither, let it decay. I'm not coming from that tradition. Otherwise I wouldn't have even formed a family, I wouldn't have even conceived children. What for? The tradition I come from actually is embracing all these aspects, all these roles, because they're as valid and as precious and as important. But it's a very, very vast thing. Perhaps, we should not go there, because we don't want to give very, very an easy baked answer, if you see what I mean. But yes, I've been there. And prior to that experience, I was, for a long time, I was, what am I? Where am I? So yes, I relate to that question very much, that the transition, that fear. So I'm saying that even that fear is artificial, because once you transit, that fear is just evaporated, and there is, it doesn't exist. So it's just like giving you a kind of like a helpful hand, that yes, there's nothing to worry about, because we cannot be anyone other than ourselves. That is the most amazing thing about this whole thing, is that we can try, but we cannot, because that light that illumines, even that gaze that you are beholding me and I'm beholding you, is illumined by that one consciousness.
Thank you for that.
My pen belt.
Yeah, translate that please, and we'll round it up.
Bueno, que él también ha vivido un momento de transición muy, muy poderoso, por así decirlo, en el que durante 3 días no se identificaba en absoluto con su cuerpo, y a la hora de, digamos, de volver a entrar en el cuerpo, tampoco es que estuviera separado del cuerpo, pero a la hora de volver a entrar era encontrarse con ¿y este quién es? ¿No? Y bueno, después entendió pues también la significación de por qué estamos en el cuerpo, de por qué necesitamos esta vida mundanal, ¿no? Él también viene de una tradición espiritual en la que se valora mucho pues esta vida pues él mismo tiene su familia y entiende la importancia de esta vida y no se rechaza en absoluto, como en algunas traducciones, el cuerpo.
No worries, but I'm saying that there is nothing to worry because we cannot be anything other than what we are.
Que no hay nada de que preocuparse porque no podemos ser ninguna otra cosa que lo que somos.
Anyway, so thank you for being here. Thank you very much. Muchas gracias.
Thank